This is the Puma Deviate Nitro Elite 2. And on paper, it's a worse shoe than last year. Same stack height, but more weight. And yet, I feel like I like this shoe more than the last one. So, am I just imagining it? Or is this yet another case where the paper specs don't tell the whole story? Yo, what's going on everybody? My name is Kofuzi and today I'm going to talk about the Puma Deviate Nitro Elite 2. But before I do, I want to go over some disclosures. This is a pair of shoes that Puma sent me for the purpose of review, so I didn't have to pay for these shoes. But they're not paying me to make this video or to use the shoe, and they're not going to get a chance to preview any of my footage or my thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. I also want to take a second right now to give a special shout out to Eric Floberg and his crew for helping out with the B-roll filming on this video. I had a chance to meet up with Eric, who is a very fast runner and also a very talented videographer. I got a chance to check out their new studio space over in Ravenswood, where he recorded me for a brief little interview. And then afterwards, we hopped over towards the lakefront, my old stomping grounds, so I can put in a threshold workout to test out these shoes. So thanks Eric and team. Now let's talk about the specs on this shoe. This is a 36mm stack height shoe with an 8mm drop, giving us 28mm of stack height in the forefoot, which, if I recall correctly, are the exact same numbers as the Puma Deviate Nitro Elite version 1. I had the chance to run in the Tracksmith collab version of this shoe last year. But I do feel like these shoes are different, and it's not just the weights, because this year, the weight on this shoe comes in substantially heavier at 211 grams or 7.44 ounces, which is much heavier than the, I believe it was 189 grams and 6.7 ounces of last year. So we're definitely moving in the wrong direction when it comes to weight. As far as the foams go, I believe it's the same foam. We're getting a supercritical Puma foam, using nitrogen to infuse that foam. So we're getting kind of the best of the best when it comes to materials that you can run on. They did change the plate this year, or at least they changed it nominally, because last year we had the Inno plate. This year we've got the Power plate, taking out all the vowels or most of the vowels in that Power plate name. And so there's been a change up in the carbon. But overall, I do think that it's pretty much the same, at least on paper. We've got Puma grip on the outsole rubber. The outsole pattern has changed slightly, but overall it's still that great Puma grip that we've come to know and love. On the upper, I think that's where most of kind of the weight gains are. We're going to a mono mesh here, which is different than the kind of like semi-transparent upper material that they used in the Deviate Nitro Elite 1. And this time they're using a little bit of the Power tape, again, removing some vowels to make it faster. I think the biggest area where there's some kind of additional weight is in the back of the shoe. There's a lot more padding in this heel area here, giving this a much bigger and more substantial bumper to make sure that heel locks in place and to provide more accommodating fit to a wider variety of heel shapes. And also, it's just got a tiny bit more structure than last year, although it's still a relatively floppy heel cup, but last year's was absolutely super floppy, and I kind of love this kind of heel. But the biggest change from last year to this year is in the overall fit in the forefoot. Last year's shoe was pretty snug, especially over here on toes number 4 and 5. If you wore a pair of socks that was a little bit too thick, you were gonna probably have a little bit of a bad day. This year, the fit is much more accommodating. I feel like they really nailed it and fixed the problems that were going on in this shoe. Now let's talk about what it was like to run in this shoe. And I feel like, to me, they've added a couple millimeters of stack height to the foam. And I do think that they've changed the shape in terms of like that toe spring, that curling of the forefoot of the shoe just a little bit. And so when I'm landing where I like to land for doing threshold repeats, which is what I took this shoe out for, or if I'm looking to do some marathon pace efforts, I'm going to be landing more in the midfoot and forefoot, right along the pads of my feet. And I feel like there's been more foam maybe just shifted over into that area. So I feel like I'm landing on a much more generous helping of that supercritical PIBA foam. Whereas in last year's version, this definitely felt like a much flatter shoe in terms of like the amount of stack height that I was standing in. And overall, the sensation of running in the Deviate Nitro Elite 2 compared to the Deviate Nitro Elite 1 is it's kind of like the same great feeling, just with a little bit more stack height, and that makes a world of difference. It takes a shoe that was kind of felt like a little bit on the minimalist side and gives it just enough so that I feel like I could really take this for the marathon distance, because that little bit of extra foam, whether it's a repositioning of the foam or an addition of stack height, and I really feel like it's an addition of stack height. That's what my foot is feeling. That makes the shoe feel really nice. Now, supercritical PIBA foam isn't like the quick squishy foam that you might see in some other racing shoes. It's a little bit denser. It's got that sinewy chewiness that we see in a lot of really great racing shoes that are a little bit denser, but allow you to kind of like load it more. And the more you load it, when you're pushing off the ground hard, it gives you back a lot of that force in a really powerful and kind of propulsive way. I feel like that with the new plate, and I think they may have changed the plate position just a little bit, moving it a little bit higher up in the shoe so it's not quite so low to the ground as it was last year. I feel like that slightly higher plate position also is helping to make the overall shoe feel just a little bit softer. But it still is retaining the same kind of essence of the Nitro Elite version 1 that I think a lot of you guys liked, which it was a very balanced shoe. There's no kind of one sensation that's overwhelming the experience. It's not a big squish of a shoe. It's not a high rebound shoe. It's not a big carbon kind of shoe. Everything's really well balanced. It feels like a very thoughtfully created shoe. And because of that, I think some people are going to end up kind of overlooking the shoe because it's going to feel not as, exciting to run in. And I think that's going to be a real shame, because I think that this shoe does something that a lot of people are looking for, not the majority of people, but there is this kind of undercurrent that I see in a lot of the comments from all of these other super shoes that I've been reviewing lately, where people are kind of like, these shoes are getting too tall, too crazy, too carbony, or whatever kind of complaint that people have. And I think people are looking for more of that experience where it doesn't feel like the shoes are running the race and you're just holding on for dear life. It's more like you are there and the shoe is just making you more you. It's you, but better. And I feel like that's kind of like the low-key sensation that this Nitro Elite 2 is definitely bringing to the table, with that at least perceived addition of a couple millimeters of stack height of that Nitro Elite supercritical PIBA foam. That makes the shoe that much more of a refined experience, and one that I think is much more suited for that marathon distance. Now, I also happened to take the shoe on another threshold run later that evening. I hopped on the treadmill for an experiment into double threshold days, and I felt like even though I was doing 2 threshold workouts in the same day, I felt like the shoe really rose to the task and was able to help me get through an evening 5K at threshold effort session. Now, the one thing that I will say though, because this isn't like a near 40 millimeter stack height shoe or even a plus 40 millimeter stack height shoe, that it did feel a little bit rougher on the body than other super shoes that I've tested recently. Part of that's gonna be the fact that I did take it on a double threshold day and I'm not used to that. But even after the first session, I did kind of feel like in one of my heels, like my left heel was feeling a little bit sore. And so I feel like it wasn't quite absorbing as much impact as some of the other shoes do. So that kind of old school racing flat sensation isn't purely just in my mind. It purely isn't just about fit and kind of weight. I feel like the shoe is just a touch rougher on the body than some of the other competitors in this space. So let's get to the summary portion where I can hopefully be a little bit more concise with my thoughts. I think that the Deviate Nitro Elite is best for running threshold repeat sessions, running your long marathon workouts, and also for racing. And because of the fact that it's so kind of buttoned up, I think that it's going to be a really fun shoe to take on races as long as the marathon distance and as short as a 5K on the roads. I feel like it's going to feel right at home at any of those race distances. Now, if you're looking to figure out what other shoes to pair this Deviate Nitro with, I think that there's 2 shoes that really come to mind that I think would be really fun to have as kind of a 1-2 punch. One is going to be the Rebel version 3 as a daily trainer. They've got fuel cell foam in it, so you've got a supercritical foam and a supercritical racer. They're using a supercritical EVA, if I'm not mistaken, in the fuel cell foam. And so you're getting kind of like a really nice squishy bouncy sensation for those daily training runs. And because it's super critical, you can get away with having a little bit less stack height. So both of these shoes kind of have that low to the ground, like old school racing flat kind of feels to them, while both of them also provide plenty of cushion for their intended purpose. So I feel like the Rebel version 3 is going to be a really optimal choice. I think another choice that might be a little bit more of a stretch, and comes to mind because it reminds me of the Deviate Nitro version 1, is the Elliott Runner from Tracksmith. Now this is a double Puma shoe where it's got a base layer of kind of a firmer Puma and then an extra thick Puma insole in it as well that is supposed to give you a nice, comfortable and cushioned experience. I do think that these two shoes could be a really fun 1-2 combo as well. If you're looking for maybe not the obvious choice in how to pair up the Puma Deviate Nitro Elite 2. Now, if you're not yet sold on the Puma Deviate Nitro 2 and you're looking for some other options, I think two shoes that are kind of similar but a little bit different than these are going to be the Hoka Rocket X2. I recently had a chance to take this out for a half marathon race down in Miami, and I feel like if you want something that's like the Deviate Nitro Elite 2, but like just a little bit more stack height, a little bit more of that carbon feeling, I feel like this is a shoe that's going to kind of like line up really closely, and both should be in your consideration. The other way that I think you can go with this is to compare it to the Vanish Carbon. Now, I feel like these two are the two most underrated shoes in recent memory in my mind. This was my most underrated shoe of last year, and I feel like the Nitro Elite 2 is going to be my most underrated shoe of 2023. It's really early in the year, and even for me, it's too early to kind of like give that label to a shoe quite yet because there's a lot of running yet to be done. But I feel like these two shoes both kind of feel like they're too low to the ground to possibly be any good, and yet you run in them and they have just a really great sensation underfoot where it feels like it's you, but better. It's not the shoe that's running the miles, it's you that's running the miles, and these shoes are helping you do it in a really fun and fast way. I feel like these two shoes are ones that you should consider at the same time. Now let's talk about the buying guide. I'm not exactly sure when the shoe goes on sale yet, and the way Puma has been doing things with their shoes, like Europe and UK are getting shoes way earlier than we are here in the US. But when the shoe does go on sale in the US, or when it does become available in the US, which is another story with Puma, the shoe is going to be retailing for $200. And I feel like if you see it for $200, I'd say definitely get it. It's a lot cheaper than the $250 to $300 that we're now seeing for a lot of racing shoes. So I recommend getting it at the $200 price if you can find it. So those are my thoughts on the Puma Deviate Nitro Elite 2. Let me know in the comments if you have any other questions, or better yet, stop by the live stream that I do Monday through Friday right here on YouTube. I'd love to talk to you guys in the chat. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I will see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?